Okay, so we're getting closer to the midterm essay, and I hope you're all caught up with the video lectures. Today we're going to talk about Robert Browning and two poems, My Last Duchess and Andrea de Sarto, and these are excellent poems. They're some of my favorite poems ever written. They're just wonderful. They demonstrate what a form called the dramatic monologue, so where the poet basically pretends to be someone else and to use irony in excess to the point where it becomes just hilarious, very quietly humorous, hilarious, satirical, with a critical edge, and anything can be turned into something quite entertaining. So this is far more, I would say, far more entertaining than anything we've ever encountered so far, and yet it prepares for modern sensibilities. And of course, when we're studying literature, we always think of literature as fictitious, not based in reality, whatever that would be. There is no, for someone strictly speaking in philosophy or literature, there is no reality. It's always a construct of language, of social conventions. The reality for a potato bug will be quite different than the reality for a bat or a human or a rock. Okay, so Robert Browning, you need to know one thing. I feel bad that we're not talking more about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She was, in fact, much more popular than Robert Browning when they were together. However, her poetry for us today, it's important, of course, but for the way the different poems and poetic lineages and anyway, the way we're approaching poetry, the dramatic monologues that Robert Browning, just a couple of them, are crucial to understanding later poets, modernist poets, T.S. Eliot and so forth, and others we're skipping. But and because this course originally I taught it as a 1-year course, but it's a 1-semester course, so had to make choices. Okay, and I prefer poetry that has a lot of condensed language rather than open, more like a novel style. And in any case, so dramatic monologue is where the poet will pretend to be one person. So in these poems, My Last Duchess, this is it can and I think should be read as a poem that combats anti-feminist sentiment. In other words, it's a feminist poem, and it's from the point of view of a very unlikable character, the Duke. Okay, and the best way to understand it is just to go through it and then talk about it. Okay, and I'll try to explain each line. So both these poems that we're going to talk about by Robert Browning are related to painting and painters. And painters were originally dependent on the patronage of wealthy aristocrats, royalty and so forth. And so to have one's portrait painted was a status a marker of status. The way today people buy fancy cars, back then they would have their portrait painted by a fancy schmancy portrait painter artist, and so you either did religious art or portraits or both, and it was considered very how do you say new to just paint landscapes or valorize like landscapes of the American landscape. That would be considered something almost political, patriotic, or this kind of. Whereas when you did a portrait for someone, they were paying for it, and that was the status was not for the painter so much as for the portrait of the person painted. And so it's in that spirit that this My Last Duchess satirizes the vanity of the Duke. Okay? Now, there's certain things that are implied here that are really hard to accept. So, but let's go through this poem. Hard to accept meaning it's just, how could this be? I mean, this poem is one of those poems that really can make one feel anger towards the Duke. So think about it. The poet is taking on the voice of someone that he is inducing us to feel hatred and disgust for. That's pretty hard to do, I think. When writing to embody in one's mind this despicable character, that's not easy. Okay? Another example of that recently, in Pierre Guyot's work. He writes in French. He just died, I found out, in February this year. He's the last of the avant-garde, and I wrote about him, and he wrote about the war for independence in Algeria. And he wrote the 500,000 soldiers. He wrote Eden, 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 and it's filled with like violence of a sort of pornographic nature involving rats, and it's just totally wacko, weird, and when Pierre Guyot was asked, how could you write such disgusting, writing? And it had an anti-colonial sort of side to it. So it had a political sort of grand corrective moral gesture built into this somewhat pornographic, violent, anti-war writing of an experimental nature. And he answered to the interviewer that it was painful to write. It was a great struggle to write, and it was not something pleasurable at all. And I think there's a little bit of that in this Browning poem, that he had to play this voice. But on the other hand, this is much more. He's having a lot of fun here. So let me just read the poem. My Last Duchess. That's my last Duchess, painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece of wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turn, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Remember, he's just sort of talking to himself, it seems, right? And he's doing two things. He's sort of bragging about the artist, and he's pointing to something that everyone supposedly would point to, and that's this the in the painting that the pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, and so this is a glance that he's obsessed with, to the point where the looking as if she were alive, the looking, the sense of the woman in the painting, the last Duchess is in the painting, and is still haunting the Duke, but haunting on many different levels. You remember in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the mariner was haunted by the act of killing the albatross. So it's in that sense that the Duke is haunted by the killing, the role he had in the killing, whether it was through poisoning or what, we don't know, but there are many implications and insinuations in this poem that the Duke killed the last Duchess. And just the idea of my last Duchess, this is not his last Duchess, because it's very clear that he's going to meet his next Duchess. So it's not like my last Duchess, my last and only Duchess. It's my last one before the next one, and the one after the one before that one, treating them as objects. So that's how this poem becomes it's not an anti-feminist poem, it's a feminist poem satirizing a man who coldly uses and maybe even murders women at his pleasure due to his abusing his status. Okay? So the last Duchess is as if part of a series of duchesses. Okay? And the idea of strangers like you, that but okay, and seemed as if they would ask me if they chose how such a glance came there. So how such a glance came there is not just how the painter was able to paint something so wonderful, but how that there was something in the woman, the last Duchess herself, that inspired the painter. And then this inspiration is identified with the same sort of smile that inspired the Duke to be attracted to the last Duchess in the first place, but also how any man would be attracted to the last Duchess in this sort of universal way that leads to a indictment of the last Duchess for flirting with other men. However, if someone blushes, because later on we're going to talk about how the last Duchess would blush when someone would see her or say something to her, and people can be flirtatious, right? That's part of life. I mean, we often can't disguise our feelings because we blush, but it's not flirting, right? We can't control ourselves if we blush and we reveal some sort of lai dian in Chinese, right? This connection, this sort of being attracted to someone, right? And so if one is attracted to someone and blushes, we can't stop it. We can only run away, hide our face, turn away, scratch our head, try to hide it, but we can't say that it's intentional. We can't say we did something wrong. How could we do something wrong, right? So just imagine a dictator, like say the jealous dictator in any choose your country, whose wife blushes at someone, and then you have this like line out of Alice in Wonderland, off with his head sort of attitude. Okay, so that's the character here. So it's a powerful man abusing his power, mixed with the character of the jealous husband. And so he explains, Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Panov chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. So this spot of joy, which can be identified with some sort of localized joy songs, but it's this joy into the Duchess' cheek, implicitly is some sort of blushing effect in the Duchess. In other words, she was of a sort that easily blushed. She got a little flush in her cheek. And so the half flush. And so anyone could bring that flush, according to the jealous Duke, by just saying certain words that titillated her. She had, this is line 22, a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. So this is basically saying, in common vernacular, she's a slut. I mean, this is about as close as a polite conversation could say. It's in other words, it's an indictment. It's a very rude implications. Okay, basically saying that she's the kind that even if she didn't sleep around, she had it in her mind, and that was bad enough. Okay, so this is a very, very violent, quietly violent poem. Okay. And then, how does he claim that he's a good person after saying, making all these implications? And remember, what's important here is that if someone blushes when someone says something, it's not, she didn't say anything. And you cannot, like I said again, you cannot help. It's a I guess it's fully really, it's a natural response. It's something we can't consciously do. I can't say I'm going to blush now. I can't do that. It's like I can't say I'm going to cry now. Some actors probably can do that, but usually you have to imagine some scene that makes you cry, or have some physical sliced onions present nearby to get you to cry. Some sort of cause effect from external factors. But you can't just fake this, right? And so basically he's blaming her. This is an important point. Intentionality is important if you're going to say someone is guilty, especially when someone is killed, as the implication is here. The dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech or blush. So here, the approving speech, just saying something polite and nice, is intentional. Okay, but the blush is unintentional. Okay, she thanked men. Good, because you always should, say thank you, right? But thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So what he's saying is, he, the Duke, with a named estate and so forth, family lineage, and going back to the logic of Edmund Burke, this landed inheritance, the rights of the landed men, as if someone who just broke off a branch of cherries for her could win her heart as easily as he had through lending his name through marriage to her. Okay, this is the implication here. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Okay, even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will or intentions quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss or there exceed the mark, and if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, and even, and then would be some stooping. So in other words, he's saying, he's not going to stoop, and I choose never to stoop. He's saying, as a man, I would never engage in any sort of begging for love. This is what he's, the meaning here. Never engage in any begging for love, to work out some sort of negotiation of the truth. The facts stand as I see them as a man. And that's the way he's talking, okay? Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? So she smiles to him as she smiles to anyone. Who passed without the same smile? But when you say, oh, sir, she smiled no doubt whenever I passed her, after this dialogue criticizing her, it implies that even if he didn't breach the subject in words, it was implied by his actions that he was really mad at her, and so this tension grew. This grew, and then I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Okay, so that's the main part of the dialogue. And so he's obsessed, just like the Ancient Mariner in the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is obsessed with repeating his tale. This has a sense of a rehearsed tale, told partly out of guilt and partly out of sort of bragging. And so it's a satire, it's a critique of masculine power. Okay, he's Browning is saying this is a sort of offensive human being that women have to put up with, and it's sick. Okay, so this is it's called a damning critique. Okay, so notice here it says, in line 45, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. This implies that he didn't just threaten her, because remember, he's not going to negotiate. He made commands that she would be poisoned or killed or something to make it look, but she's gone. But she's still up on the wall, like a trophy. You've heard of trophy wife? Well, this is a sort of trophy picture of a former trophy wife that he'll probably leave on the wall, even though the new trophy wife enters the household. Okay. So the guest now is addressed in the middle of this line 47. Wilt please you rise? Do you want to get up? We'll meet the company below. Then, I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. So in other words, this is going to be part of a marriage arrangement. Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. So they're going downstairs to meet someone whose daughter is his next object. And here, object, after learning about what kind of person this is, really takes on the sense of his next victim. And this is the irony of the point of view of the reader. Reading this poem will immediately read victim into the word object here. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though. So this is another um, work of art in his collection. Taming a seahorse. Thought a rarity which claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So now, not only is the last Duchess part of a series of wives, but she's in a series of paintings too. She's become a series of paintings. So this is a sort of added irony. So you can see a sort of telescoping of reality and art, and this masking of violent actions. Yeah. In art. Okay. Okay, so that's a short one. The next one is, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email, okay? Or post it online. And sometimes I get the emails that are posted, sometimes I don't. It's very weird. So I don't know what's going on. Okay, so please go ahead, and this one's much longer. Okay, so we'll just talk about the important passages. This is called Andrea del Sarto, called the Faultless Painter. This one has a similar sort of pathetic character, but this one is not the, how do you say, not the terrible man. He's the victim of his own passions, you could say, and also he has a wife who has a boyfriend, and he's sort of stuck in this triangle relationship that he doesn't want because he loves his wife too much, so much that, to put it a long story short, he traded his future as a great painter, according to his own account, by stealing money to build a house to make his wife happy. But then by doing that, he became a sort of persona non grata, where he's reduced to a minor painter rather than a great painter that he was expected to be. And he used to have the patronage of what are called in this poem the Paris lords, and he lost that because he stole from them. So the story is not so clear. There's no running commentary like in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. You have to read it in detail to understand it, but it is a hilarious poem, and it's definitely worth the read. The Last Duchess is very short. It's pretty clear what's going on once you see it. This one has a lot of different elements that are a little bit harder to piece together, but what I just told you is the gist of it. And again, this is a dramatic monologue. Okay, but here, the man is not so despicable, easy to hate. He's sort of a pathetic, tragic figure, and he's quite lovable in his own sad way. This Andrea del Sarto. Okay. Yeah. So in short, he sold out his career to please his wife, and stole money when he was asked to, because the Paris lords, they trusted him with money to take to Italy or somewhere, and then he just stole the money, and so then they hate him now, and talk about him. And Lucretia, the poem ends with his wife Lucretia, who he loves so much. I mean, it's obvious from the way he writes his poem, going off with her cousin, which is a euphemism for lover, and to pile irony, sad situation upon sad situation, which makes for great literature. He's actually paying off the debts for her cousin lover, which, by the way, if it's not a euphemism, if you take it literally as cousin, it's quite normal in Europe even now, for people to marry their cousins. And actually, I don't know how that works in Taiwan, but it's quite common in Europe. In America, it's not so. Yeah, if it were so, I would have been quite happy because I had a very, very nice cousin. But that's too bad. Oh well. Okay. Are we allowed to talk about these things in recorded videos? I hope so. I hope I don't swear too much. But that's part of teaching literature, is to understand the whole range of human experience. Goes into literature. Yeah. Okay. So I will be skipping around, so make sure you follow with the page numbers that I indicate. But first we'll start with the opening. But do not let us quarrel anymore. No, my Lucrezia. Bear with me for once. Sit down, and all shall happen as you wish. You turn your face, but does it bring your heart? Are all work then for your friend's friend? Never fear. Treat his own subject after his own way, fix his own time, accept to his own price, and shut the money into this small hand when next it takes mine. Will it? Tenderly? Okay, so you understand what this is saying? It's basically saying that I'll give you anything you want, honey, my wife. Just I'll give you money for your friend's friend or whatever you need. I'll paint whatever needs to be painted in the way they want. I won't demand my artistic integrity, is the implication there. And all I ask is, could you think about, darling, being nice to me sometimes? To actually love him. So there's this deferral of love from her to him. And love is something that really thrives when you have both people into it, right? If it becomes one-sided love, it's like game over, right? And I mean, everyone has rough patches, but love as a dynamic of a relationship requires two people, right? And so here we have a one-sided love, and there's a high likelihood within the structure of this poem that the wife Lucrezia is not only seeing other men and using Andrea de Sarto's money to give to them, but also that she is quite aware of his emotional dependence on her, and sort of what's called stringing him along to get maximum benefits from him. And he is so obsessed with her, in love with her, that he's willing and happy to engage in this giving of everything to her, for her, even though it seems quite hopeless. There's a rule you guys should know, that never get involved in other people's love affairs. You just don't. It'll always lead to disaster. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so let's skip a little bit. Let's skip to line, where is it here? 25 here. It saves the expense of a model. So looking so, my serpentining beauty, rounds on rounds. How could you ever prick those perfect ears, even to put the pearl there? Oh, so sweet, my face, my moon, my everybody's moon, which everybody looks on and calls his, and I suppose is looked on by in turn, while she looks no one's, very dear, no less. You smile, why, there's my picture ready made. There's what we painters call our harmony. Everything coming together, all the elements of the spark of inspiration too, probably. So he's talking about his wife, and again there's this image, like in The Last Duchess, of a woman whose glances whenever her type thing, and also someone who is always resisting, playing coy with everyone to lead everyone along, sort of stringing everyone along, and having a full what do you call it, contact list or something like this that she rotates through or something like that. It's the implication here. Little black book. And when she smiles here, it's not the smile of admitting to liking him. It's a smile of realizing that he understands her. So they have this mutual understanding that she sort of has many boyfriends that she sees, and that he is obsessed with her. And so he basically becomes one of many of her boyfriends, even though he's the husband. Okay? In Europe, it's a little bit, from my observations, it's a little freer. Or at least it used to be a little bit freer there. Yeah. Okay. Let's go down to line 60. Love 58. It is a thing, love, so such things should be. Behold, Madonna, I am bold to say. I can do with my pencil what I know, what I see, what at bottom of my heart I wish for. If I ever wish so deep, do easily, too, when I say perfectly, I do not boast, perhaps. Yourself are judge, who listened to the legates talk last week, and just as much they used to say in France. At any rate, 'tis easy, all of it. No sketches first, no studies, that's long past. I do what many dream of all their lives. Dream, strive to do, and agonize to do, and fail in doing. I could count 20 such on twice your fingers, and not leave this town. Who strive, you don't know how the others strive, to paint a little thing that you smeared carelessly passing with your robes afloat. Yet do much less, so much less, someone says. I know his name, no matter, so much less. Well, less is more, Lucrezia, I am judge. There burns a truer light of God in them, in their vexed, beating, stuffed and stopped up brain, hot, whatever else that goes on to prompt this low post forthright craftsman's hand of mine. Okay, what he's doing here, he's going from one extreme to another. Dramatizing. The line 75 where it says, carelessly passing with your robes afloat, that you smeared. He's blaming his wife. And this is a motif here. This does have a feminist aspect to it, this poem, when he blames his wife for everything. So he made the choice to steal the money for his wife, but his wife did not make the choice to steal the money. He did. He needs to take responsibility, right? That's what we're made to see by the way the poem is constructed. And so he cannot blame his wife for that. He may blame for other things, but not for that. And this passage that I just read is the placing of himself within a range of skilled painters, visual artists. And this is one of the major themes of this poem, is how he feels that he's not living up to his potential as a great artist. And so he talks about how he doesn't have to make sketches first, line 68. He doesn't have to make sketches, he just does it. But he implies that in the past he did all of his studies, he did all of his preparations, and now he's a great artist. And that most will fail in doing this, in line 71 there. Many people try to be artists, but they just don't pull it off. They can't do it, right? But he did it. But, and then he blames her for smudging this delicate work that is so great. But then he says, I am judged. There burns a truer light in God in them. Okay? And so he's talking about the footnotes throughout this will mention Michelangelo and Raphael. these great painters they're still famous today, right? And then I think there's Michelangelo, Raphael. I think there's one more. Da Vinci is mentioned too. I think, yeah. Leonardo da Vinci is also mentioned, and so what those painters are considered, great artists, and some are like Da Vinci is a polymath, a jack of all trades, a genius of many talents. And yet, Andrea del Sarto, in the very pettiness of his obsessing over his wife, and also he blames that he has a wife. Basically, he blames that he's what we call straight. Basically says they didn't have to worry about that. That's why they're great, because they were, this kind of, humor, or not humor, maybe serious, but for him, and this is why this poem is so wonderful. It basically builds on the gossip of art history, and the famous art historian Vasari will be quoted not only by Robert Browning, but by John Ashbery, over 100 years later, in Ashbery's American poems. He was an art critic, and so he would dip into this literature too for inspiration. Okay. So on line 90, I painting from myself and to myself. So he's basically saying I paint for my own pleasure. Know what I do, and unmoved by men's blame, people who criticize him, or their praise either. He's basically saying I know where I stand, and I'm very happy with what I do. But then let's go on here. He goes on talk about the urbanist, Raphael, 105, the urbanist who died 5 years ago. 'Tis copied. George Vasari sent it me. Well, I can fancy how he did it all, pouring his soul with kings and popes to see. Kings and popes to see. This is not just kings are looking at his work. They're the ones who are footing the bill, so that not only he would be painting, he'd have a whole team of artists working under him, and he would just go around and correct things, probably this kind of thing. Not Andrea del Sarto, Raphael. So he, as we'll see later in the specific mention, Andrea del Sarto becomes sort of an outcast, whereas these other artists, Michelangelo and Raphael, they became insiders, winning the endless chains of commissions, patronage by these kings and popes and so forth. Okay. Then he goes on. He again exhibiting this pettiness. He goes on talking about Raphael reaching that heaven might so replenish him above and through his art, for it gives way. That arm is wrongly put, and there again a fault to pardon in the drawing's lines, its body, so to speak. Its soul is right, he means right, that a child may understand. Still, what an arm! And I could alter it, but all the play, the insight, and the stretch out of me. And wherefore out? Had you enjoined them on me, given me so, we might have risen to Raphael, I and you. Nay, love, you did give all I asked, I think, more than I merit, yes, by many times. But had you, the same perfect brow, and perfect eyes, and more than a perfect mouth, and the low voice of my soul hears, as a bird, a fowler's pipe, and follows to the snare. Had you with these the same, but brought a mind, some woman do so. So he's basically saying, she's like, I always compare this to the nightmare. This is my personal nightmare. Is if I ended up with a woman who all she cares about is buying LV bags. I mean, that would be just a nightmare to me, personally. I mean, hey guys, if you like it, go for it. But to me, that'd be just too much, right? So he's complaining that he didn't get a partner, whether man or woman doesn't matter, a partner with brains, with a mind, but only one with this sort of for gain, interested in gain. Had the mouth there urged God and the glory, never care for gain, the present by the future, what is that? Live for fame, side by side with Michelangelo is supposed to be the meaning there. Raphael is waiting, up to God, all three. It might have done it for you, so it seems, perhaps not. So he's also sort of suggesting that if she really wanted greatness, she shouldn't have been always pushing for the short-term gains, doing commissions for short-term gains, as well as what pressured him into stealing, too. So there are all these different aspects rolled in. And in footnote here, where's that footnote? If you go down to line 149, you can see the implication here of the stealing. 145, I dare not. Do you know, leave home all day for fear of chancing on the Paris lords? The best is when they pass and look aside. But they speak sometimes. I must bear it all. Well, may they speak, that Francis, that first time, in that long festal year at Fontainebleau. I surely then could sometimes leave the ground, put on the glory, Raphael's daily wear, in that humane great blah blah blah. So the point here, if you look in the footnote, in my version, the footnote is King Francis I of France had invited Andrea to his court at Fontainebleau. I hope I'm pronouncing that halfway right. And warmly encouraged him in his painting. On returning to Florence, however, Andrea is reputed to have stolen some funds entrusted to him by Francis, and to please Lucrezia, he built a house with the money. Now he's afraid of being insulted by Paris lords on the street. Okay, that's the most important incident that speaks to his character and to the hold of his wife Lucrezia over him and his lack of good judgment. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Also, line 176. You, beautiful Lucrezia, that are mine. So the irony is that, okay, maybe she's his in name, but is she his? The whole poem would suggest she's not. She provides, she works as a model for him. She's the wife, but she's waiting for just get away from him, right? Go out with her cousin, lover. And so it's quite dramatic, Pitoué sort of nightmare. Could be called Andrea de Sarto's Nightmare. You know, could be for the title. Here's the other, related to what we've been talking about, I've been mentioning, is line 204-ish there. This hour has been an hour. Another smile? If you would sit thus by me every night. So she smiles, and then she's so happy, says, if you could do that all the time, I should work better. Do you comprehend? So he's saying that if she were nicer to him as a wife, it would be good for her in the long run, and that he would work better, become more famous as an artist, make more money for her, and she would be happier. So it's a sort of vicious circle. And also, again, there's this theme of begging for love, right? Remember the last Duchess? He refused to beg for love and so murdered her, right? So here it's totally different. He's a much more nuanced and pathetic, in some ways, character, Andrea del Sarto. Very interesting poem, I think. The second one is much more complex. Um, and then, but he explains here in very vulgar terms, I mean that I should earn more, give you more. Okay? So this is a working contradiction. If you want to be great, um, you can't be chasing money to the point where you steal from the Paris lords, the sponsors, and destroy his reputation. People laugh at him now. You have to embody a character to do work for the Pope, for instance, right? Most people would say. And so this poses a working irony, conflict, contradiction that runs through the entire poem. That on the one hand, the more he focuses on making money for his wife, the less famous he is and lives his dream as an artist. And the more he gives into this, I guess you call it the LV bag culture of just pursuing the LV bag, the BMW or Mercedes, and this kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. And then again, line 214, he alludes to the stolen money. King Francis may forgive me. Okay. And then we're getting towards the end of the poem. Let us, line 219, let us but love each other. Must you go? That cousin, here again, he waits outside, must see you, and not with me. Oh, I see. Those loans, more gaming debts to pay? You smiled for that? Smiled here means you had, something more going on. No, sorry. Smiled for that means she smiled to him so that he would feel that she loves him, but actually to get money for the cousin who's his real lover. And so the smile to get money from Andrea de Sarto, the painter, was actually a smile thinking about the good she's doing to make her lover happy, the cousin happy, not him. Again, smiles are really key for Browning. Well, let smiles buy me. Have you more to spend? In other words, can you smile some more? As long as you smile, I'll be happy. Basically saying if you pretend to love me, that's good enough. While hand and eye and something of a heart are left me, something of a heart are left me, it's pretty pathetic, works my wear. So he's burying himself in his work, is what he's saying. And what's it worth? I'll pay my fancy, only let me sit the grey remainder of the evening out, idle, you call it, and muse perfectly how I could paint were I but back in France. One picture, just one more, the Virgin's face, not yours this time. I want you at my side to hear them, that is, Michelangelo, and then Raphael and Da Vinci. Judge all I do and tell you of its worth. Will you tomorrow satisfy your friend? Take the subjects for his corridor. Finish the portrait out of hand. There, and throw him in another thing or two if he demurs. The whole should prove enough to pay for this same cousin's freak in here. Notice the whim is the cousin's whim, what he wants. Besides, what's better, and what's all I care about? Get you the 13 scuddy for the rough, the money. The rough is the cousin. Love, does that please you? Ah, but what does he, the cousin, what does he to please you more? So he's basically saying that, I know you're having sex with him, and, I know you love him more, and this kind of thing. But he would like to become a great painter. He just goes off on this almost megalomaniac fantasy in the part I just read there from 230 on there, about rising up again as a great, if only she would go with him and they could make good on the stolen money or something. If not that, at least somehow make amends by just showing how great a painter he is. And then the rest is sort of a denouement, is recapitulating everything. the saddest thing is the footnote saying this is something unthinkable and intolerable for Taiwanese sensibility. Line 250, my father and mother died of want. This is from the historians note that Andrea was so infatuated with Lucretia and trying to please her by giving her money that he stopped supporting his own impoverished parents. Okay? So this really brings him down another notch. Okay. I don't know. I think that's about it. Oh yeah, there's one. Oh yeah, remember I mentioned about the gay thing. So if you go to line 264, 263, for Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo and me to cover the first three without a wife, while I have mine. So its implication is that there's a benefit in being what we call gay as an artist. Is sort of, and he's using that as an excuse. And this is an anti-feminist gesture, so it should be recognized for that and criticized. While I have mine, so, but it's all ironic. This is a poem, satirizing this sexism, and also satirizing the willingness to allow himself to be abused by his wife, and satirizing the wife's abuse, because these kind of people actually exist in real life. You can hear all kinds of stories. Okay, but then my favorite line is the ending here. So 265. So still they overcome because there's still Lucretia as I choose. So she's determined. This sort of what do you call it? Fatal character flaw of a sort of tragic figure. But then the last line, this really pulls the poem into focus. Again, the cousins whistle. Again, this is the key, this sense of thinking in terms of series. Again, the cousins whistle, go, my love. So it's full of contradictions. The cousin, really a lover. Whistle, calling, not silently or, it's whistle very ostentatiously. And then ending with go, my love. And it's not like go away, my love. It's go, my love. I know you'll come back to me, but go for now. This is reluctance in it. So this is really a wonderful poem, I think. It's full of, I guess we call it gossip that stays gossip. News that stays news. That's one definition of literature. Was that Ezra Pound that said that, I think? And that's about it. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. The big themes these are more about situating the artist, the patron to the artist, and the drama involved within the art world of its time. Today, if we updated this poem, we wouldn't have the kings involved. We would have the gallery dealers, the critics, maybe the museum curators, perhaps, involved in this sort of thing, and it'd be a totally different poem. So your challenge, if you like to write poems, is try to recast this poem in a modern setting. Yeah. Okay, I better end there. Okay. There'll be more video, audio on some more poems by Tennyson and Swinburne coming up, but I'll get this out first. Bye. Stay safe.